Indian politics constitute a fascinating chapter of political studies. There have been so many categories, so many issues, and so many factors, and each of them plays their role not only singly but in consultation with others, that they play a very rich cauldron of study. Of different categories and issues that we have, caste is a very important category that plays a major role in the development of Indian politics. It is not that caste only plays a role. While playing this role, caste is also being shaped by the nature and the contours of Indian politics. We will be discussing this particular category, this particular issue, that is caste in Indian politics, in two lectures. This one and the lecture following this. This lecture will be devoting caste in two different sections. In the first section, we will be principally discussing the definition of caste and the features of caste. And in the second section, we will be discussing the role of caste and the kind of politics that caste is playing during the colonial period or since the advent of modernity in Indian politics. We will be dividing this second section into several subcategories, like the role of caste during the colonial period by way of looking at from the perspective of the British intervention, then from the perspective of the kinds of reaction that we have from the people of India, then the coalescence or the mixture of caste and class, then the ushering in of the sovereign democratic republican India through the adoption of constitution, and finally the consciousness of caste during the post-independent period. Now, coming to the first section, that is the definition and the features of caste, we find that, like many other concepts of political studies, sociologists are not in agreement regarding the definition of caste. Some believe that caste is an offshoot of the traditional Varna system, that is the Chaturvarna Pratha or the four Varna system that existed from the later part of the Vedic period and which became a very structured and crystallized form since the days of the Smriti literature. According to that tradition, there were four Varnas, the Brahmanas, or those who are repositories of knowledge, or in other words, whose powers derived from the resource called knowledge. Then the Kshatriyas, that is, who were mainly the warrior class, and the royalty was derived from this class, and whose source of power was derived from the kinds of politics or political resources. The third one, the Vaishyas or the trading class, whose power was mainly derived from the economic resources, and finally the Shudras, that is, who were principally the laboring class and who were mostly deprived of the power structures of the then society. Outside this four Varna system was the Panchamas or the Atishudras, who were not included in this Varna system and who were considered as the untouchables. Now, we find that many sociologists considered the modern caste system as a byproduct or an offshoot of this Varna system. But there are some problems if we consider caste in that manner. The first problem is that there are many castes who do not fit within this four Varna system. And secondly, several castes, or that is more than one caste, have to be grouped in this 4-Varna system. So normally the sociologists nowadays are discarding this kind of argument or this kind of definition regarding caste, and they are considering caste not as a Varna but as a Jati. The modern day definition of caste is principally derived from the definition provided by the eminent sociologist Professor G.S. Ghurye during the early part of the 20th century in his famous book Caste and Race in India. Now, Professor Ghurye identified certain features associated with caste. These features are, first, the castes are primarily social groups which are hierarchical in nature, and the hierarchy represents a kind of pyramidal structure. That is, the castes which are more powerful are fewer in number and exist at the top, and the castes which are not so powerful are higher in number and exist at the bottom of the pyramid. So it is a hierarchical kind of social structure. The second feature is that caste is determined by birth. That is, someone who is born into a particular caste is or has that caste by virtue of being born in that caste. And that is why any kind of social mobility or transferring of from this caste to that caste is totally prohibited or is not allowed. So this one is the second feature. The third feature is that caste is an endogamous group, meaning thereby that there are certain rules and regulations that guide marriage that are permissible for one group of castes and which are not permitted or which are prohibited from between one group of castes and another group of castes. So this is another very important feature of caste. The fourth important feature is that it is the profession or the kind of activities that a member of a particular caste has to do is determined by the kind of caste or by the caste to which he is born. So according to this line or according to these features provided by Professor Ghurye, we find that caste is a social group which corresponds more or less to Jati and not to the Varna system. We know that Manusmriti provided certain basic rules for governing the way how a caste should be organized. And gradually this system became very, very structured, crystallized, rigid, which cannot be changed under any circumstance. So the caste strictures or the caste stipulations became so much dominating over the life of an individual that some people enjoyed all the kinds of powers and privileges for generations, and some people were deprived of all kinds of powers and privileges for generations. So this was a kind of system which got crystallized since the days of the Smriti literature and continued throughout the middle period and was continuing even during the colonial period, even when certain features of modernity began to be established in India. But during the colonial period, some questions were raised regarding this very stifling and stipulating caste strictures. The first was, there was a kind of intervention from the colonial masters into this caste system. And the second one was a kind of reaction that emerged from the people, either due to the intervention of the British or due to some people who had received formal education, British education, they were revolting against such caste strictures. So first, let us look at the kind of intervention that the British did during the colonial period. The first one was during 1880s. In 1880, the British tried to introduce certain benefits to those people who were deprived of all kinds of education. Or in other words, they were trying to give certain benefits to the backward castes. Now, whenever this kind of policy was about to be introduced, an enumeration of the backward castes was needed. So, when the British tried to introduce in 1880, it was followed by the enumeration of the backward castes in 1883. Now, this enumeration was a major political or social event if we look at caste as an important category of Indian politics, because after that there were petitions and there were demands before the British government that there should be a separate kind of electorate for these backward castes. In 1909, before the Morley-Minto Commission, this kind of demand was placed. Then in 1919, before the Montagu-Chelmsford Commission, there was another demand for a separate electorate of these backward castes. Then in 1935, when following the Government of India Act, elections were held in 1937, there were some parties formed on the basis of caste affiliation who were trying to participate and contest the electoral politics through their caste affiliations. Meanwhile, some castes like the Kurmis, the Ahirs and the Jats, they were trying to form some caste groups in order to participate in the electoral politics and thereby influencing the Indian politics as a whole. So this was the first kind of British intervention in the caste political status of India. The second intervention was that the Britishers took the advice of the Brahmins, particularly of Maharashtra, to try to find out that what kind of benefits and what kind of privileges should be given so that a kind of equal society could be established in India. Now, this created two kinds of reactions. First was the Brahmins, whose advice was taken, became extremely powerful in their local regions. They tried to establish their monopoly power over the remaining castes. And the second reaction was that an anti-Brahmin movement began to evolve in Maharashtra and in South India and even in some parts of northern India. While the anti-Brahmin movement in Maharashtra took the form of Phule and Ambedkarite movements, the anti-Brahmin movement of South India took the form of Dravida Munnetra movement, which is even relevant in today's Indian politics. So the second kind of intervention that the Britishers took created on the one hand a very powerful Brahmin lobby and on the other hand a kind of anti-Brahmin movement, particularly in Maharashtra and in South India. Then the third kind of British intervention was from 1931 onwards. They were trying to introduce some kinds of legislations for prohibiting the practice of untouchability which was going on with this system of caste. So in 1932, the Bombay Presidency promulgated such an act, and similarly the other presidencies were also trying to create these kinds of legislations prior to the Indian independence, but they were very much aware that these kinds of practices are not congenial and not consistent with a modern period. So this was the third kind of intervention that the Britishers took. This created a kind of reactions. One was a kind of movements in South India, which is still relevant in today's Indian politics. The other was the Phule-Ambedkarite movement. Jyotiba Phule was a major social reformer of Maharashtra who believed that if we have untouchability and if we cannot provide education to the backward castes, then the modern Indian political system is hard to evolve. So he developed several political organizations, several social organizations to bring this particular issue into fore. And the other was a very famous event initiated by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. He, on the one hand, took some legal steps in order to introduce certain practices and certain benefits for the castes, and on the other hand, he in fact initiated certain satyagraha, certain movements, the most important of which was the Mahad Satyagraha, which he initiated for developing or for eradicating the inequalities that were associated with caste. So this was the kind of things that were going on during the colonial period prior to Indian independence. Now came the major event in 1947, the Indian Independence Act, and followed by perhaps the more important event, that is the adoption of the Indian Constitution and the ushering in of a sovereign, democratic, republican India in 1950. We have to keep in mind that many political leaders, sociologists and political scientists during that period were of the opinion that a modern democratic political India is inconsistent with the caste practices, the kind of caste system that this Indian society has. So a kind of dichotomy, a kind of conflict between the modern political nation state and the traditional society of India existed, which was considered to be absolutely redundant or absolutely irrelevant to most of the political scientists and the sociologists. So the major thing, the major thrust was given in the Indian Constitution that in order to bring equality and in order to bring justice, we need certain things for the amelioration of the caste inequalities and for the eradication of the practices that are associated with the caste system. So, some of the things were adopted in the Indian Constitution. The first was certain protective provisions that were given to the backward castes in order to bring in an equal society. The most important of which was Article 17, where untouchability in any form was pronounced to be an acceptable crime, so it should be abolished and prohibited. Inconsistent with that article, the Prevention of Untouchability Act for the scheduled castes was adopted. So this is one of the major aspects of the Indian Constitution where certain protective provisions were created. The second was the kind of what we call positive discrimination. That is, certain special privileges and certain special provisions were given to the scheduled castes in order to bring in justice and equality. It was believed that the castes who were deprived of all kinds of benefits and education for more than 5,000 years, who were socially humiliated, who were considered to be outcasts, who were considered to be totally untouchable by the upper castes, they cannot compete with the upper castes if the kind of competition normally that we face, they have to face in that manner. So, a special provisions, special reservations were given to them in educational institutions, in public employment, and in representative institutions. This positive discrimination is referred to as the policy of reservation. So this was the second kind of provisions that the Constitution took following its adoption. The third major aspect is certain developmental strategies were initiated by the Constitution, or rather the Constitution proclaims that certain legislations are necessary for the development of this particular group of people, which will not violate the principle of equality, because certain special provisions need to be endorsed by the Indian state in order to bring them from their inferior position so that India could really usher in an equal society. So these were the major provisions that the Constitution took, and following the adoption of the Constitution, several acts were passed, keeping in mind the basic constitutional resources or basic constitutional protections that were given to these castes. So this was so far as the adoption of the Indian Constitution vis-a-vis the caste system of India is concerned. The next major area that we should discuss in this respect is the coalescence of caste and class. It has been found by many sociologists, many ethnographers and anthropologists that India, there have been some kind of mixing up or coalescence of caste and class, meaning thereby that those who are upper castes, they incidentally happen to be those who in fact control the economic resources. That is, they are the classes which hold a higher position in the class hierarchy. So there is a kind of mixing up between the caste hierarchy and the class hierarchy. Similarly, those who happen to be inferior castes or the so-called backward castes do not possess enough economic resources, and they are also inferior in the class hierarchy. Here we may say that the social backwardness and the economic backwardness become consistent, and some kind of correlation could have been established between these two categories. Now finally, we are coming to the last section, which is a very important aspect of the interplay of caste and Indian politics. That is, when the modern sovereign democratic India has evolved, what exactly is the situation of caste? What is the kind of perception that the Indian people have towards caste? Are they become more aware of their caste identity, or the caste identity, is it declining? If it is not, then whether the increasing caste awareness is consistent with the equal democratic Indian politics. So this aspect constitutes a major area of the interplay between caste and Indian politics. At the very outset, let me say that most of the political scientists and sociologists currently are of the opinion that caste awareness or identity of caste has not declined in the post-independence period. In fact, there has been a major theoretical assumption regarding this. Sociologists and political scientists, the most important of which was Professor Rajni Kothari, they argue that the Indian politics have evolved in such a manner that two simultaneous processes have come into existence. They are simultaneous different processes but very much linked to each other. One is the politicization of the caste and the other is the casteization of politics, which means that there emerged a dialectical relation, a very dynamic dialectical relation between caste and politics. On the one hand, politics is shaping caste in such a manner that caste is becoming politicized. And on the other hand, caste is shaping politics in such a manner that politics is also getting casteized. So it is not that there has been a decline in the awareness of caste in the post-independence period. Rather, it becomes a very lively, dynamic category in Indian political scenario. Now, many would have raised a question that is this consistent with a democratic Indian politics? In the post-independent India, the interesting facet is that caste and politics are intertwined, but the connection, the interconnection has become more transparent. It becomes more open. It becomes more pronounced, so that political scientists, sociologists, researchers, and even man on the street can identify the relation between these two. This, in fact, constitutes a major area of the dynamics between caste and politics with respect to India, and this particular aspect will be discussed in a detailed manner in the next lecture.